The sound is what stayed with me, not the shouting, not the humiliation, not even the words. The sound, skin against skin, sharp, sudden, final, it cracked through the Thanksgiving dining room like a branch snapping in winter. For half a second, no one breathed. My 8-year-old son's head snapped sideways, his small body staggered. The plate in his hand slipped and shattered. Green beans scattered across Margaret Monroe's polished hardwood floor like shrapnel. And my son fell with them. 15 adults sat frozen around that long mahogany table. Crystal glasses, gold-trimmed plates, white linen napkins folded like royalty. No one moved, no one spoke. My husband Daniel stood by the window, mouth slightly open, hands hanging uselessly at his sides. His sister Victoria stared down at her phone like she had just received an urgent notification. My father-in-law Robert looked at his plate as if the mashed potatoes held the secrets of the universe. And Margaret Monroe, my mother-in-law, stood over my child, her perfectly manicured hand still midair, her diamonds catching the chandelier light. "He is not real family." Her voice was steady, controlled, deliberate. "Get out of my seat." My son's body hit the floor harder than it should have, but he didn't cry. That terrified me more than the slap, because 8-year-olds cry. Unless they've already learned it doesn't help. I didn't scream, I didn't lunge at her, I didn't make a scene. I crossed the room, slowly kneeled beside Ethan. His small hands were shaking, but he was trying to pick up the broken plate pieces. "Stop," I whispered. His cheek was already turning red, a perfect outline of her fingers blooming across his skin. And then he said something that broke me in a way the slap couldn't. "I'm sorry, Mom, I didn't mean to sit there." He apologized for being hit, for existing. I stood up, lifted him into my arms. And that was the moment something inside me locked into place. Cold, clear, final, I walked back to the table, reached into my purse, and placed a single envelope in front of Margaret Monroe. "My lawyer is already involved." 6 words, calm, measured, like I was commenting on the weather. Margaret's fork slipped from her hand, clattered against the china. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. She stared at the envelope, like it might explode. Daniel finally spoke. "Jessica, what are you doing?" I turned and looked at him, really looked at him. The man I married 3 years ago, the man who had sworn to protect us. "You had a chance to move," I said quietly. "You had a chance to speak." I paused. "You chose neither." His face drained of color, but he didn't follow me, he didn't defend his son, he didn't challenge his mother. He stood there, frozen between 2 worlds, and I knew something with brutal clarity. He had been frozen his whole life. Margaret cleared her throat. "This is a family matter, you're being dramatic." I almost laughed. My son had just been slapped in front of 15 witnesses, but I was dramatic, classic Margaret, cruelty disguised as authority, and anyone who reacted to it was the problem. Victoria leaned forward. "Jessica, don't escalate this. Think about Daniel, think about the family." I adjusted Ethan on my hip. He was trembling now, silent, but trembling. "I am thinking about my family," I said, and I walked toward the door. Margaret's voice followed me. "You can't just leave, we haven't even had dessert." Dessert, like pumpkin pie, was the issue. Daniel followed me into the foyer. "Jess, please, let's talk." I stopped, turned to him. "You watched her hit him?" I was in shock. "No," I said quietly, "you were obedient." That word hit him harder than anything else I could have said, because he knew it was true. He had learned obedience early. Survival meant compliance. And tonight he chose survival. But I chose war. The November air hit my face like cold water, clarifying. Ethan buried his face in my neck. I strapped him into his car seat, my hands steady, my insides shaking. Before I shut his door, he asked, "Are we coming back?" I paused. He deserved truth. "No, baby, we're not." The drive home was silent. Streetlights passed over his swollen cheek in bands of yellow and shadow. My phone buzzed. Daniel. Margaret, Victoria, numbers I didn't recognize. I silenced them all. 3 weeks ago, I found out about the trust. 3 weeks ago, I stopped hoping Margaret would change. Tonight was supposed to be her final test. She failed. When we got home, I ran a bath for Ethan. Under better lighting, the bruise looked worse, dark purple at the edges. You could almost see each finger. I took photos, different angles, better clarity, evidence. He watched me. "Why are you taking pictures?" "Just in case." He didn't ask in case of what, because he already understood more than he should. Later, when I tucked him into bed, he asked the question I knew was coming. Mom, am I not real family? There are questions that pierce you. That one split me in half. I sat beside him, took his hands. You are the realest thing in my life, I said. You are my family, always. He searched my face, like he was measuring whether my promise could survive reality. Then he nodded, slow, deliberate, and closed his eyes. I stayed there long after he fell asleep, watching his breathing, making a vow. No one would ever make him feel disposable again, not while I was alive. When I finally walked into the kitchen, my phone showed 23 missed calls, 47 text messages. I ignored them, opened my laptop, and opened the folder my attorney sent me. Inside were documents Margaret hoped I would never see. The original trust, signed by Harold Monroe, Daniel's grandfather, 6 months before he died. Beneficiaries listed clearly: Emma Monroe, Tyler Monroe, and Ethan James Wilson Monroe, my son, included, protected, loved. Then I opened the amended trust, dated 3 months after Harold's death. Ethan's name removed, redistributed, reason. Beneficiary not of direct bloodline, Margaret's signature at the bottom, trustee, and Victoria's signature as witness. I stared at the bank statements next. $153,000, that was Ethan's share. Gone. Spent on kitchen renovations, a new Lexus, administrative fees, luxury travel. Margaret hadn't just slapped my son, she had been robbing him for over a year. I closed the laptop slowly. Let the silence settle around me. They thought I would stay quiet. They thought I would smile, swallow insults, teach my son to accept less. They were wrong. Margaret Monroe raised her hand against my child, but what she really did was wake me up. And tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The next morning, the house felt different. Quieter, not peaceful, just hollow, like something had already left. Even though Daniel's car was still in the driveway, I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. That sound, and then Ethan's voice. I'm sorry, Mom, 8 years old, apologizing for being hit. I made coffee I didn't drink and stood at the kitchen window watching the sky turn gray. The world outside moved normally. Cars passed, neighbors walked dogs, somewhere someone laughed, and I felt like I was standing in the aftermath of something no one else could see. I checked on Ethan. He was awake, sitting upright in bed. Not playing, not reading, just staring at the wall. His cheek had darkened overnight, purple spreading outward like ink in water. When he saw me, he straightened, like he needed to brace himself. Morning, baby, I said softly. Morning. His voice was neutral, too neutral. I made pancakes, his favorite, extra syrup, blueberries on the side. He took 3 bites, then just pushed the food around the plate. Finally, without looking up, he asked, Is Dad coming home? My chest tightened. I don't know, he nodded like he had already expected that answer. It's okay, he said quietly. He has to take care of his mom. I had to turn away for a second, because what kind of world teaches a child to excuse the adult who failed him? After breakfast, I took more photos of the bruise. Documentation mattered. Proof mattered because I already knew how this family worked. Without proof, it would become, she misunderstood. He provoked her. You're overreacting. Margaret didn't yell, she rewrote reality. And everyone else adjusted their memory to fit her version. I would not let that happen this time. Around mid-morning, Daniel came home. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Wrinkled shirt, red eyes, shoulders heavy. He stood in the kitchen doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed inside. Jess, he started, I'm sorry I didn't come home. I didn't answer that. Instead, I asked the only thing that mattered. Where is her apology? He blinked. What? Your mother hit our son. Where is her apology? He ran a hand through his hair. She thinks, I don't care what she thinks. Silence stretched between us. She says Ethan knew the seating arrangement, Daniel finished quietly. I laughed. It didn't sound like me. There is no seating arrangement, Daniel. There's just your mother deciding who counts. He sat down heavily. You don't understand what she's like. Then explain it to me. And for the first time in 3 years, he did. He told me about growing up under Margaret's control, how she chose his clothes, his college, his friends, how disagreement meant emotional exile. And then he told me about Marcus, his older brother, the one no one mentioned. Marcus had married a woman Margaret didn't approve of, a woman she called unsuitable. Margaret gave him an ultimatum, the family or the marriage. Marcus chose love. Within a month, he was erased. Photos removed, name never spoken. Inheritance revoked. Daniel was 15 when he watched his brother disappear. That's when I learned, he said quietly. You don't fight her. I stared at him. And you decided survival was more important than justice. He didn't answer. Because he didn't need to, I walked to the window. I filed legal papers before Thanksgiving. His head snapped up. What? I found out about the trust. I hired an attorney. His face went pale. Jess, if you do this, she will destroy us, I finished. She'll cut me off. And, he looked at me like I'd just spoken another language. And what? If your financial security depends on enabling abuse, what does that say about you? His voice cracked. You're asking me to choose between my mother and my family. No, I said quietly. I'm asking you to choose between fear and integrity. He didn't answer. Instead, he went to the guest room and closed the door. And that told me everything. Later that afternoon, Ethan stood in the hallway. He had heard enough. He didn't ask whether his father had chosen us. He already knew. That night, I opened my laptop again. And this time, I didn't just read the documents. I studied them. The original trust was airtight. Harold Monroe had been deliberate. He had included Ethan 6 months before his death. Full name, equal share, no bloodline clause. No conditions. Then came the amended trust, dated 3 months after Harold died. Ethan's name removed. A new line added, beneficiary must be of direct bloodline, Margaret's signature, Victoria's signature as witness. That detail mattered because it meant it wasn't just Margaret, it was coordination. And then the bank statements. I did the math again, $460,000 originally. $12,418 remaining. That meant $447,582 had vanished, withdrawn under vague descriptions. Administrative expenses, family enrichment, educational allocation, except Ethan received nothing, not a dollar. I leaned back in my chair, and for the first time I allowed myself to remember Harold. 18 months ago at a family barbecue, Ethan had been sitting alone on the porch steps, watching Emma and Tyler play, not invited, not included. Harold had walked over, lowered himself beside him, and asked, "Why so serious, young man?" Ethan had shrugged. "They don't want me in the game." Harold studied him for a moment. "You know," he said, "people underestimate the quiet ones." Ethan looked up. "They do, oh yes," Harold smiled. "But that's their mistake." Later that day, as we were leaving, Ethan asked me, "Is Grandpa Harold my grandpa too?" I hesitated, because in that family belonging felt conditional. But Harold answered for me, "Any child in this family is my grandchild. Blood doesn't make family, love does." Margaret had rolled her eyes from inside the house. "Stop filling his head with nonsense." But Harold had just winked. 6 months later, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4, Margaret focused on paperwork, on control, on what would happen after. Harold focused on Ethan. Hospital visits became their ritual. Ethan read to him. Adventure stories, fantasy novels, dragons and heroes and impossible battles. And one afternoon, when Ethan stepped out to get a snack, Harold took my hand. "Protect that boy," he said. "Margaret will try to erase him. I won't let her," I promised. He squeezed my hand. "I know." Now, sitting in my kitchen, staring at the evidence, I realized something. Harold had anticipated this. That's why he included Ethan formally. That's why the trust existed. And Margaret didn't just betray Ethan. She betrayed Harold's last act of love. My phone buzzed again. "Margaret," I let it ring. Then a text from Victoria. "You're making a mistake. Call me before you go too far." Too far? That phrase always amused me, because when powerful people get exposed, accountability feels extreme. I screenshot the message. Everything was documentation now. Then I opened a blank document and started writing my own timeline. Date by date, event by event, slap, trust amendment, withdrawals, silence. I wasn't reacting anymore, I was building a case. And as I typed, something inside me shifted. This wasn't about money, it wasn't even about revenge, it was about narrative. For 3 years, Margaret controlled the story. She decided who belonged, who mattered, who was worthy. But now I had facts, and facts don't bend to intimidation. Later that night, Ethan came into the kitchen. He climbed into the chair beside me. "You're still working?" "Yes." "Are you going to make her say sorry?" I paused. "I'm going to make sure she can't hurt you again." He considered that. "Okay." He didn't ask for more, he trusted me. And that trust felt heavier than any legal document. When he went back to bed, I closed my laptop, sat in the quiet, and realized something terrifying. Margaret had built her power on silence, on people being too afraid to confront her. Daniel, Victoria, Robert, even the extended family. But silence only works until someone stops participating, and I had stopped. Tomorrow, I would meet with my attorney in person. Tomorrow, this would become official. And Margaret Monroe would learn what happens when the quiet one stops watching and starts fighting. The morning of the meeting felt almost peaceful. That's the strange thing about war. Before the first real strike, there's quiet. Ethan was getting ready for school when I walked into his room. He was staring at himself in the mirror, touching the fading bruise, not in pain, just studying it. Like he was trying to understand what it meant. I stepped behind him. "You don't have to go today," I said. He shook his head. "I'm okay." His voice was steady, but his shoulders weren't. I knelt in front of him. "Listen to me carefully. What happened was not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." He nodded, but I could see the doubt. Because when adults hurt children, children don't question the adult. They question themselves. "Mom, yes, is Grandma mad at me?" I inhaled slowly. "She's mad because she can't control everything." He frowned. "I didn't try to control anything." "I know, and that was the point." After I dropped him at school, I sat in the parking lot longer than necessary, watching him walk inside. Small backpack, straight posture, trying to be brave. I felt something cold settle in my chest again. Resolve. Margaret had underestimated me. She thought I was just the quiet wife. The outsider, the woman who married into money and should feel grateful. But what she never understood, I grew up with nothing. And people who grow up with nothing learn how to survive without it. The law office was downtown, glass building, sterile lobby, everything sharp and professional. I liked that. There's comfort in places where rules exist, where facts matter, where intimidation doesn't replace evidence. My attorney, Melissa Grant, met me at the elevator, early 40s, precise eyes, no nonsense. "I reviewed everything again," she said as we walked into the conference room. "You were right to document the injury." I slid the printed photos across the table. She examined them carefully. "That's clear physical assault." Hearing it phrased clinically steadied me. Not misunderstanding, not family tension. Assault. She opened a folder. "Here's where things get interesting." She pointed to the amended trust. "The timing is questionable. The change was executed after Harold's medical decline. Meaning we can argue undue influence." I felt my pulse quicken. "Explain." Margaret was trustee. "If Harold was weakened, medicated, or cognitively compromised, we can challenge the amendment's validity. And if it's invalid, the original trust stands." Ethan's name restored, full share reinstated. But Melissa wasn't finished. "There's more. The withdrawals from the trust account exceed reasonable administrative expenses." "How much?" She flipped a page. "Approximately $447,000. Hearing the number out loud felt surreal. "That's criminal," I whispered. "It could be. At minimum, it's a breach of fiduciary duty." I leaned back. "So what happens next?" "We file a petition to contest the amendment. We request a forensic accounting." And she looked directly at me. "If you want to pursue assault charges, we can." The word hung between us. Charges. I pictured Margaret's face, controlled, polished, respected in the community. Country club board member. Charity gala host, local philanthropist. A woman who shook hands with judges and senators. I imagined that image cracking, and I felt something dark flicker inside me. "Yes," I said quietly. Melissa nodded once. "Understood." We drafted everything that afternoon. Each signature I placed on those documents felt deliberate, not emotional, not reckless, calculated. When I left the office, my phone had 14 missed calls. Daniel, Victoria. An unknown number, then a voicemail from Margaret. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "Jessica, this has gone far enough. You're embarrassing the family. Call me immediately." Embarrassing the family. I listened to it twice. Not because I was intimidated, but because I wanted to memorize the tone. The certainty, the assumption of power she believed was permanent. I didn't call back. Instead, I drove to Ethan's school early. When he walked out, he spotted me immediately. "You're early." "I finished work early." He climbed into the car, glanced at me. "Did you win?" I smiled slightly. "We started." He nodded like that was enough. On the drive home, he asked, "Is Dad still mad?" I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "Your dad is confused." "About what?" "About who he wants to be." Ethan looked out the window. "I hope he picks us." So did I. But hope wasn't a strategy. That evening, Daniel came into the kitchen while I was cooking. "I got a call from Victoria," he said. I didn't turn around. "I'm sure you did. She said you filed something." "Yes," he exhaled sharply. "You're forcing this?" I set the knife down slowly, turned to face him. "No, your mother forced this when she hit our son. She didn't mean, don't." He stopped, because even he could hear how weak that sounded. "You don't understand what she'll do," he said quietly. "I do," I replied. "She'll threaten, she'll manipulate, she'll isolate. And if she cuts me off financially, then we adjust." He stared at me like I'd just suggested living in a cave. "You don't get it," he said. "Everything I have, everything we have, it's tied to her." That was the moment clarity hit me. "You mean everything you have?" Silence, heavy, he didn't deny it, because deep down he knew the house. "The investments, the security, came from Margaret, not him, and certainly not me. You're asking me to risk everything," he said. I walked closer, lowered my voice. "No, I'm asking you to earn it." That landed hard. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, not fear, not obedience. Shame. He left the room without another word. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. "I'd be careful if I were you." No signature, no context, but I knew. I screenshot it, forwarded it to Melissa. Documentation, always documentation. Then another message. "You don't understand who you're dealing with." I typed back one sentence. "You're right, I don't fear her." And I put my phone down, because intimidation only works when you respond emotionally. I wasn't emotional anymore. I was methodical. 2 days later, Margaret made her move. A formal letter arrived from her attorney, accusing me of defamation, threatening countersuit, demanding immediate retraction of false allegations. I read it once, then handed it to Melissa. She smiled. "They're scared." "How can you tell? If they were confident, they'd stay silent." That made sense. Powerful people don't threaten, they act. Threats are cracks in armor. That evening, I sat on Ethan's bed again. He was drawing. "What are you making?" "A dragon." "Is it friendly?" He shook his head. "It protects treasure." I smiled faintly. "What's the treasure?" He looked at me. Me, and something inside me steadied completely. This wasn't about humiliation or proving a point. It was about teaching my son that protection doesn't require shouting. That strength can be quiet. And that when someone crosses a line, you don't scream, you build. The petition was officially filed the next morning. Margaret would be served within 48 hours. The clock had started. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt calm. Because silent revenge isn't loud. It doesn't rant. It doesn't explode. It waits. And Margaret Monroe had just stepped into a battle she thought she'd already won. She had no idea the quiet one was finished watching. Margaret was served on a Tuesday. 11:42 a.m. I know the exact time because Victoria called me at 11:49. 7 minutes. That's how long it took for the illusion of control to start trembling. "You've gone too far." No greeting, no pretense, just accusation. I was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing Ethan's homework. "I filed legal paperwork," I replied calmly. "That's not too far, that's procedure." "You blindsided her." I almost smiled. "She slapped my son." Victoria inhaled sharply. "You keep saying that like she committed a crime." "She did." Silence, then her voice lowered. "You don't understand what you're doing to this family." There it was again, the family, as if family was some sacred temple that required sacrifice. And somehow the sacrifice was always us. "I understand exactly what I'm doing," I said. "I'm ending a pattern." She hung up on me. 3 hours later, Daniel came home early. His face was pale. "They froze my accounts." I didn't react. "Your personal accounts?" "Yes. Or the ones tied to the family trust." He stared at me. "You knew she'd do this?" "Yes. And you didn't warn me." I stood slowly. "I told you there would be consequences." "That's not the same thing." "No," I said quietly, "it's not. Because you thought consequences only applied to me." That hit hard. He ran both hands over his face. "She's cutting off everything, the investment account, the discretionary fund, even the business loan extension." And, he repeated, almost laughing. "Jess, do you have any idea what that means?" "It means she's using money as a weapon." And if we lose the house, we won't. How are you so sure? Because while Daniel had been raised in comfort, I had been raised in instability. And instability teaches you how to calculate risk. I have savings, I said. He blinked. What? I never told you because I never needed to, but I have my own portfolio. My own emergency reserve. His expression shifted from shock to confusion. How much? Enough. Enough to survive. Enough to remove fear from the equation. Enough to fight without panic. Margaret had always assumed I was financially dependent. It was one of the reasons she tolerated me. She thought I was temporary, replaceable. She didn't realize I had been preparing long before Thanksgiving. When I discovered the trust amendment 3 weeks before the dinner, I started restructuring quietly. Consulting advisors, moving assets, separating what was legally mine, not because I planned to leave, but because I refused to be cornered. Daniel sat down slowly. You never told me. You never asked. He looked at me differently then. Like he was seeing something new, not just his wife, but someone strategic. That night Margaret called, not through attorneys, not through Victoria, directly. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then I answered. Hello, Margaret? Her voice was smooth, controlled, but there was something underneath. Strain, you've made your point. No, I replied calmly. I've filed my case. You're humiliating us. I'm holding you accountable. She paused. You think you can win this? I don't think. I know what the documents say. Her tone sharpened. Documents can be interpreted. So can slaps. Silence. Then you're forgetting something? Oh, you married into this family. I let that hang for a moment. Then answered quietly, no, I married Daniel and I gave birth to Ethan. That's my family. Her voice hardened. If you continue, there will be no coming back. I don't intend to. That was the first crack. She didn't threat. She didn't scream. She ended the call abruptly. Control requires composure, and she was losing hers. 2 days later, the community whispers started. A neighbor stopped me outside. I heard there's tension. I smiled politely. Families can be complicated. I didn't offer details, because silence is powerful when you don't owe explanations. At Ethan's school pickup, another mother approached. Margaret mentioned something about misunderstandings. Of course she did. She was planting narrative seeds, reframing events. I looked directly at her. There was no misunderstanding. And that was all I said, because people are perceptive. They read confidence, and I wasn't wavering. That evening, Melissa called. We've received preliminary bank records. And there are discrepancies. My pulse quickened. How significant? Transfers to personal accounts. Luxury travel charged directly to trust funds. Home renovations labeled as estate preservation. That was fraud, not morally, legally. Can we prove intent? We don't need to prove intent yet, Melissa said. We need to show misuse, and we can. I leaned against the counter. For months, I had felt like Margaret's power was absolute. Untouchable, but now there were numbers, signatures, paper trails. Truth doesn't shout, it accumulates. That night, Daniel knocked on the bedroom door. I've been thinking, he said. I waited. I called Marcus. That made me look up. Your brother? Yes. How did he respond? Daniel swallowed. He said he's proud of you. Something shifted inside me. Marcus had been the ghost in the family portrait, the erased son. And now he was watching from outside. He had survived Margaret's exile. Is he coming back? I asked. Daniel shook his head. He said once you leave, you build your own life, you don't go back. And that was the second crack. Because Daniel was hearing an alternative narrative, one where survival didn't mean obedience. The next morning, Ethan showed me his dragon drawing again. It had grown, wings wider, teeth sharper. Is it still guarding treasure? I asked. He nodded. Is the treasure safe? He thought for a moment. It will be. That night I received an email from Margaret's attorney. They wanted mediation, fast, urgent, confidential. I forwarded it to Melissa. Her reply was immediate. They're bleeding, and that's when I understood something critical. Margaret wasn't afraid of losing money. She was afraid of exposure, because reputation was her real currency. Country clubs, charity boards, social circles. She could lose thousands, but she couldn't lose image. And if forensic accounting became public, if assault charges moved forward, her image would fracture. I sat at the kitchen table alone, phone in hand, and for the first time I felt something close to satisfaction, not because she was scared, but because she was finally vulnerable. Ethan came into the room quietly. Are we winning? I looked at him, not with arrogance. Not with triumph, but with certainty. We're telling the truth, I said, and the truth doesn't lose. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to bed. I stayed there longer, thinking about something Harold once said to Ethan. People underestimate the quiet ones. Margaret underestimated me, Daniel underestimated himself, and Ethan was learning something important. That protection isn't loud, that revenge doesn't require rage. And that power, real power, is built in silence. Mediation was scheduled for Friday. Margaret thought she could control the narrative in a private room. She thought she could intimidate, manipulate, negotiate. What she didn't understand was that I wasn't there to negotiate dignity. I was there to reclaim it. And by Friday, the real confrontation would begin. Friday arrived cold and bright. The kind of morning where the sky looks deceptively clear, like nothing ugly could possibly happen under it. Mediation was set for 9 o'clock a.m. Neutral office. Downtown, private conference suite. Margaret's territory had always been living rooms and gala halls, spaces where she controlled the temperature, the lighting, the narrative. Today wasn't her stage. It was a room with fluorescent lights, legal pads, and 2 attorneys who cared more about documentation than reputation. Daniel insisted on coming. He hadn't said much the night before, just, I need to be there. I didn't argue, because today wasn't just about Margaret. It was about him choosing who he wanted to become. We arrived early. Melissa was already seated, calm, organized. You don't have to say much, she told me quietly. Let the paper speak. I nodded. That had become my philosophy. At 9:07, Margaret entered, perfect posture, cream blazer. Pearl necklace, image intact. Victoria followed behind her, eyes sharp, lips pressed thin. Margaret didn't look at me at first. She looked at Daniel like he was the lever she could still pull. Daniel, she said softly, almost maternally. You don't have to let this continue. There it was, the hook, the guilt, the emotional tether. Daniel inhaled, and for a split second I saw the old reflex, obedience. But then he did something small, subtle. He stepped back, not dramatically. Just half a step, and stood beside me instead of beside her. Margaret noticed. Her eyes flickered. Crack number 3, we all sat. Margaret's attorney began with smooth language. Let's avoid unnecessary escalation. This is a family matter. Emotions ran high. Melissa didn't blink. Physical assault of a minor and fiduciary misuse of trust funds are not emotional misunderstandings. Margaret's jaw tightened. You're exaggerating. I finally spoke. You left a bruise on my son's face. The room went quiet. For the first time, Margaret looked directly at me, and I saw it, not dominance, not certainty, calculation. How is he? She asked, almost politely. That tone. Like she was inquiring about the weather. He's 8, I said evenly. He shouldn't have to learn what betrayal feels like. Margaret straightened. I will not be painted as a monster. No, I replied. You painted yourself? Melissa slid a folder across the table. Bank records, transfer histories, highlighted withdrawals, the forensic summary. Margaret's attorney flipped through them. His expression changed incrementally. This is preliminary, he said cautiously. It's enough, Melissa replied. Margaret spoke again. You have no idea what managing an estate requires. Apparently it requires a new Lexus, I said quietly. Victoria's face flushed. Margaret's composure faltered for half a second. That's all it takes. Half a second for power to wobble. The conversation moved into numbers, restitution, reinstatement of the original trust, repayment schedule, potential criminal exposure. Each word felt heavy, precise. Margaret tried to redirect. You're destroying Daniel's future. Daniel finally spoke. My future isn't built on stolen money. The silence after that was different, thicker, because that wasn't me speaking. That was him. Margaret stared at him like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. You're choosing her, she said quietly. Daniel didn't hesitate. I'm choosing my son. And just like that, the cycle cracked. Margaret leaned back. And for the first time in 3 years, she looked old, not physically, but structurally. Like the architecture of control she'd built was sagging. Mediation lasted 4 hours, offers, counteroffers, strategic pauses. Margaret tried intimidation, then persuasion, then wounded dignity. None of it worked, because this wasn't emotional anymore, it was documented. By 1:36 p.m. we had a tentative agreement. The amended trust would be voided. The original reinstated. Full restitution of Ethan's share plus interest, personal repayment plan for misused funds, and a written acknowledgement of inappropriate physical conduct. Not the word assault, but close enough for civil leverage. Margaret signed last. Her hand was steady, but slower than usual. When she finished, she didn't look at me, she looked at Daniel. "You'll regret this." He didn't respond. Because regret belongs to people who act without conviction, and for the first time he had conviction. Outside the building, the air felt lighter, not triumphant, just clean. Daniel turned to me. "I'm sorry, for what? For waiting this long?" I studied him. He wasn't the same man who froze at Thanksgiving. He had chosen, that mattered. "We build from here," I said, not as forgiveness, as direction. When we picked Ethan up from school, he ran toward us. "Did you win?" I knelt in front of him. "We protected what was yours." He thought about that, then smiled. That simple, that pure, that was the treasure. Weeks passed. The restitution began. Margaret resigned from 2 charity boards for personal reasons. The whispers in the community shifted. Subtle, controlled, but different. People are observant. They sense fractures. Victoria stopped calling. Robert sent a quiet apology note. Not dramatic, just, "I should have spoken." Marcus reached out again. "Welcome to the outside," he wrote, and Margaret, she retreated, still wealthy, still socially present, but diminished. Because power that relies on silence becomes fragile once exposed. One evening, months later, Ethan brought home another drawing. The dragon again, but this time it wasn't guarding treasure, it was flying. "What changed?" I asked. He grinned. "It doesn't have to guard anymore." That's when I understood. Revenge isn't about destruction, it's about correction. It's about restoring balance. About teaching your child that when someone tries to erase them, you don't shrink, you stand. Quietly, strategically, unapologetically, Margaret Monroe thought she slapped a child into place. What she really did was awaken a mother who refused to kneel. And that's the thing about silent revenge. It doesn't shout, it doesn't beg. It doesn't perform, it builds, it documents, it waits. And when it moves, it doesn't just win, it rewrites the story. And in this story, my son will never again question whether he belongs. Because belonging isn't granted by people like Margaret, it's defended by people like me.